Hi, and welcome to Schema Stories. My name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm the co-founder of Schema Apps. And our Schema Stories bring you real people doing schema.org markup who share their tools and insights on how it affects their business and their agency. So today I'm joined by Mike Arnesen from UpBuild. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Great, so we're just gonna get started. Mike, tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and about your company.
All right, so I have a kind of rather long story, so I'll keep it pretty quick. But I moved actually from history when I graduated from college. I got a degree in history, fell into web development through WordPress. Eventually discovered SEO, found out that it was the coolest thing I'd ever had been exposed to in my life, and decided I wanted to figure out how to make a career in that. And so really the key takeaway is I was a geek that got a lot of good chances, and toward the end of kind of my journey there, I discovered schema.org, and it was like, semantic markup is the coolest thing because it has everything that I love. Is I can play with SEO, I can play with web development, and I can make it actually mean something through applying this cool markup. And fortunately was able to kind of play with creative ways of doing that, a little outside of the norm, which I really like. And today I'm the founder and CEO of a company called UpBuild, as you mentioned. And that was, I guess you could say in large part, a result of digging into schema.org and doing funny things with it, with like Google Tag Manager, for example, which we'll talk about later. But being able to do that made me want to actually have a company where I could do that all day. So I started UpBuild as a technical marketing agency. So I essentially hire people like me who love to geek out about this stuff, and I let them do it. And I still get to get my hands dirty pretty often as well.
Excellent. And one of the questions I like to ask is around sort of, in your own words, describe semantic search. So if you were to kind of tell it to my mother to explain it, what words would you use?
Yeah. So to describe semantic search, I would break it down as, the search of today is very much based on, maybe not the search of today, the search of a couple of years ago, very much based on the words that are contained within web pages. And so if you're looking for a specific thing in Google search, Google is going to try to find the page that's most relevant to that specific phrase that you're looking for. With semantic search, what Google is trying to do, and other search engines, of course, are trying to understand what you mean by that, and understand that pages that might not even necessarily have that word or that phrase in their content, they want to understand that those pages are nonetheless about that and would be a good resource for that. So semantic markup is something that supports semantic search, because we need to have machines be able to understand content as well as we do as humans. And that's kind of the dream and the goal of semantic search.
Sweet, thanks. So you obviously built UpBuild to be able to geek out and focus and do semantic search and other cool things. Tell us how it fits into your overall company strategy.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that semantic search is a major part of the service that we offer to our clients. It's kind of one of our key deliverables that we do as part of an engagement. So of course, we hop in and we always want to look at like the site's technical foundation and framework first, and make sure everything is in line, because no use having semantic markup on the site if search engines can't even get to the site or access its code. So we make sure all that's cleaned up, and then we kind of start looking at not just the keywords that we want to use on a site, but the topics and the themes that the site is talking about. And from there, we'll still do some of that traditional keyword strategy, but we try to identify like, what are the entities that we're ultimately going to want to have on this site? What are those kind of topics? What potential kind of recognized entities in Google are we going to be able to relate to that website? So like, what Wikipedia pages are we going to be able to hook into this client's content? Free-based entities, things like that. So we kind of start thinking about that all from day one, and then eventually get really deep into a full-fledged like markup strategy of, okay, here's what we're going to do through microdata, through JSON LD, and stuff like that, and then work with the clients to get it added to their site.
Excellent. Now, often people are looking at schema.org sort of tactically in search, like, oh, I want to get a rich snippet, right? So I'm going to add this structured data. To me, there's like a bigger strategic play that you can do with semantic search. Can you talk a bit about sort of your view on that?
Yeah. I definitely view it as a long-term strategic play. And it's kind of funny because we have a little bit of a divergence, I guess, in how we think of it, because we at UpBuild, kind of internally, we talk a lot about, what is this going to mean for the future of the websites that we're working on? Like maybe today, local attorney isn't going to be something that's going to generate us a rich snippet, but the hope and speculation, of course, is that it's going to ultimately lend a better ability to understand that content to Google. And so we'll talk about the stuff and say, okay, like really our in with a client is say like, okay, well, this is going to help you get rich snippets. It's going to get the ratings and reviews stars in Google, or it's going to allow your price and your items availability to show up. But also while we're doing it, let's do all this other stuff that, may provide a benefit. And so we try to get that all taken care of and use those kind of short-term wins as a way to usher in something much bigger that's much more strategic and long-term.
Excellent. And what else do you use it for? So it's for search, but I know you've been sort of a thought leader around sort of semantic analytics. Can you give us some more detail on sort of how maybe some of the things that you're playing with about how it can be used differently and sort of for different intelligence or different insights for a client?
Yeah, and the idea of semantic analytics, essentially taking your semantic markup data and joining that with your analytics data, isn't a unique thing really by any means, but it's kind of bridging the gap between two disciplines. Really, like you can have an SEO who is really great at semantic markup and just SEO in general, and doesn't really have a good solid competency in analytics, and that's fine actually. And you can have an analytics expert who can go through a site and like tag everything, set up all the data, like for Google's enhanced e-commerce features. Like there's so much data layered in there that perfectly overlaps with stuff we do on the semantic side. And this actually, the idea really kind of spawned as I was in an agency setting prior to the one I'm at now, where we had an analytics team that did their own thing, and then an SEO team that did their own independent thing. And we didn't really talk as much as we should have or could have together. Yeah. And I was realizing like the analytics team is putting all of this code on the site to say like, okay, what's the name of the product? What's the price of the product? And that's just going straight into Google Analytics. And then on the other side, we're doing all this work to put it in that same exact data, but in schema.org microdata format. And so why not bring the two together? So semantic analytics is about bridging that divide and kind of just being aware that, there's value on both sides. You have this central core bundle of data, and you want to be able to use it ideally for both search and analytics. So it's all about bringing those two together.
Excellent. Any other sort of use cases? You mentioned Google Tag Manager. Do you want to speak a bit about sort of how Google Tag Manager plays in with schema.org? Yeah.
So Google Tag Manager, I think, is just a really, really great tool for us as web marketers to have access to. It's, of course, great if you're working on analytics implementations for your clients, but it's also great if you're just an SEO. Or if you're both, it's even better. And one of my developer colleagues at one point really broke it down, and I was like, oh, yeah, he's totally right. He really just said, Google Tag Manager is simply an abstraction of JavaScript. So it brings a lot of the power of just JavaScript in general as a scripting language, but makes it a little more accessible and kind of contextualizes it for our needs as marketers and analysts. So using Google Tag Manager, some of the stuff that you can do is really cool. Is you can actually harness the power of JavaScript to grab things off of the page, so pretty much anything you wanted. And the original, I think, intention when Google created that was that you'd be able to pull things like the product name off the page and use that in your analytics. So the kind of one thing led to another as I was thinking through it and said, okay, why don't we take that and use it for a bunch of different things? So we can actually, if we already have schema.org markup in line on the site, we can say, okay, Google Tag Manager, go look for, item prop equals name and grab that value. And we can put that into analytics. If we don't already have something like JSON LD JavaScript markup on the site, we can take that value and build out our own JSON LD files as well. So lots of cool stuff there, and a lot of potential for just playing with that data, bring it into your analytics with the goal of really what I love is being able to understand your pages semantically, to not just say, okay, here's a URL and it got 10,000 visits this month. This second URL got 5,000 visits. We don't necessarily know why, especially because keyword data, of course, is much harder to come by than it was 5 years ago. But with semantic analytics, one of the things that we can do is bring in the different item types. So we can actually look at our content by the type of semantic entity it is. We could look at, you know, a specialty or an about topic for a piece of content, sort by that. A classic example is sorting blog posts by authors, bringing that information in semantically. And then even things like, you know, looking at bounce rate by sorting based on availability on an e-commerce site. You can see in stock, out of stock. How does that affect conversion rate, and of course just stickiness of the site? Do we need to work on that? All these kind of things that, you know, once we get deeper than just that top level page, we can understand stuff that can actually be really, really insightful beyond SEO, beyond analytics. Like, they can actually fuel business decisions. Like, do we need to fix our supply chain because we have all these out of stock products that are driving people away from the site because they can't find anything they want? That kind of stuff is really, really cool. And I think as an industry, we're just, you know, looking at the tip of the iceberg here. We have much deeper to go, and there's so much potential underneath.
Sweet. One of the things I get asked often, especially with even agencies who are adopting Schema.org or sort of early in their journey, is like, you know, how do you articulate the value? And so you've talked a bit about sort of the value from the business intelligence that if you use like structured data kind of beyond just for the SEO purpose. Can you talk about sort of when you have a conversation with your clients, sort of how you articulate that value?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because really when you're working with a client, of course, your goal is to help them meet their business needs, to increase the metrics that they're being judged against. And we kind of always informally say, like, our goal is to make our clients look like rock stars, their bosses. So we got to do that. And it's sometimes can be tricky to sell schema markup as like, hey, this is going to make the web a better place. Usually, if you have a marketing director, like, they're not going to care unless they're awesome geeks. And they're like, oh yeah, totally. Actually, funny story. We work with a law firm, and the lead partner at the law firm is like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, if I didn't do law, I would want to work with you guys to like do semantic markup because this is so neat. I'm like, that's awesome. The beautiful thing I've ever heard. But yeah, really, semantic analytics has been a helpful tool in kind of selling schema markup. So we can say like, hey, this is going to provide you greater intelligence on how your site is doing. We can, you know, pull better data from it to help you make business decisions. It's also going to get you the short-term benefits of the, you know, rich snippets in search. Cool things now that, of course, Google is doing is like having more and more support for JSON LD markup. So things like recipe-rich cards we're starting to get into to be able to say like, hey, you have recipes on your site, or even you have like news articles on your site. We're going to pull that data off of your pages, reformat it, and kind of re-articulate it using Google Tag Manager and push it out with JSON LD to make this, to allow your site to have this new feature from Google without having to even talk to your developers. We can do all that on our own and make that happen. And it's just such a crazy, cool frontier. So like even that, I think, is a selling point in and of itself to a degree, is like, hey, we can get you something that's going to benefit your SEO, and you don't need to spend extra money to have it implemented.
Awesome. Where do you think semantic search is going? Like you talked about, sort of like we're seeing that big movement towards JSON LD. Any other sort of trends, or sort of say like, this is where I think it's going to be in 12, 24 months?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about semantic search is like, if everything goes the way that we want it to go as SEOs and as marketers and as just maybe Google fans, is, you know, in 5, 6 years, 10 years, semantic markup isn't going to be needed. You know, Google's going to be able to understand our content at a deep enough level where like they don't need us to tell them that like, hey, this website is like item type schema.org/organization. Like they know it's a company. Like they're going to be able to find those signals and those kind of unique identifiers that say like, okay, this is a company with a contact page, like here's their location. We can like, now we're doing that with like 99.9% surety. We don't need necessarily the markup to do that. But right now, in the here and now, I absolutely think that it's such a benefit to be able to kind of support that. And I mean, it's always been my speculation that, long term, Google is going to remember the sites that are doing things to help them increase the quality of their product. So I think there's a number of reasons, of course, to kind of do this stuff, even though long term, it might not be something we continue needing to do. But I also see things like that make me hopeful for just the melding of web development and SEO in general with, HTML5's kind of limited set of what I would absolutely consider semantic elements, like just like the navigation tag or like asides and sections and articles in the actual HTML markup. That's not even something where you need to get into schema.org. It's kind of interesting to see those two come together, and I would anticipate in the future we may get even closer to bringing those two worlds together just as a kind of de facto new system.
Cool. So we'll wrap up. One thing I always love to ask is, where do you go to kind of stay on top of trends and things changing in sort of SEO in the semantic space? So recommendations on where people should go hunt for information.
Yeah. It's funny, like I'm not as in the weeds as I used to be, which is kind of a bummer, but of course I'm doing a lot of other things. But when I want to figure out what's going on and know exactly what's changing, I always go to Aaron Bradley's Semantic Markup community on Google+. That's a great place to check out just what's going on, what's changing. Or I mean, not everyone has this privilege, but I'll just email Aaron and be like, hey, so what's up? Or like Jarno Van Driel, who's an amazing semantic markup wizard. You could say like, yeah, he probably taught me everything new I learned about semantic markup in the last like 2 years. So great guy. So check him out he's also on the community. So, I mean, that community on Google Plus is like the place in my mind to talk about semantic markup, to get your questions answered, and of course, learn what's new in the space.
Sweet. Mike, anything else you want to share sort of as you share your story and your insights on schema.org and your company UpBuild?
No, I would just leave everyone with hopefully, if you're not already doing schema.org markup or any kind of semantic markup for that matter, now's the time to do it. And it can seem really challenging if you don't have a development background, but once you understand those basic principles, it's such an easy thing to get into your tool belt to say like, hey, this is something I can do now. And it's such a satisfying, rewarding journey once you kind of go over that precipice, and then you finally reach to the point where you're like, okay, it all clicked, and now I'm just like coasting downhill with semantic markup. It's really cool. And fortunately, there's some pretty cool tools out there, Schema App, that I think are going to make people's jobs a lot easier and then in the future as well. So check out some tools and some of the great documentation as well on schema.org to get you started.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us for Schema Stories. It's Martha Van Berkel and Mike Arnesen.